Waves swell across the river shore, and we see a house above the cliffs. It is 3:42 a.m. We see a lady slowly and quietly getting out of bed, in order not to wake her husband. We see her holding a pill bottle, which suggests she had used it on her husband to make him go unconscious. She calls him, to make sure he is completely unconscious, before examining the glass of drugged water beside him, and pours it away. She heads towards her closet and gets a bag, which contains some flight documents and some bottles of pills. She quietly makes her way outside, turning the CCTV towards Adrian to monitor him through her phone. She continues to make her way outside, and we see Adrian's lab. She makes her way towards his computer and turns off all cameras and disables the alarms. She notices one of Adrian's new inventions, though making a weird noise, but just ignores it. She gets changed into a different outfit and heads downstairs, hurriedly, and panting heavily. She hears someone coming behind her, but it turns out to just be their dog. She tells him that she's sorry, but she can't take him with her. She, however, takes off the tracking collar on his neck. But the car alarm starts blaring as soon as she does so. So she quickly makes a run for it, throwing her bag across the fence, and climbing up as well. She runs into the woods and doesn't look back, until she finally makes her way to the roads. She seems to be waiting for someone to come pick her up. She flashes the lights around the woods to make sure he is not behind her. And soon later, Emily drives up to her and she gets inside the car, but the pill bottle drops from her bag though. Emily asks if she's okay, and what's going on, but Cecilia tells her sister to just drive and she'll explain later. The next second, we see Adrian running towards them, telling her to open the door. He smashes the window and grabs her hands, but Emily managed to start the car and drive off quickly. Adrian continues to scream after them, telling her to get back, but they continue to drive off. Adrian picks up the pill bottle Cecilia left behind with his bloody fist and walks back home. 2 weeks after this incident, Cecilia now stays in a friend's house, James, who happens to be a cop, living alone with his daughter. She continues to suffer from PTSD though. Even simple things like stepping outside the house to go get the mail terrifies her, and she's afraid that Adrian will find her soon, but her James comforts her, telling her that she'll get through this. Emily comes by the house later, although Cecilia doesn't seem to be happy with her visit, because she's afraid that Adrian might follow her because he knows where she lives. Emily tells her that she doesn't need to cut her off anymore because Adrian is dead. She shows her the news on her phone. The article claims he apparently died of suicide. And as Cecilia reads this, it sends a gush of relief to her and she breaks down. Her sister consoles her and asks her for the whole truth, and what Adrian did to her that caused her to be like this. She talks to Naim and Emily about everything that had happened, how Adrian was in control of everything around, including her. What she ate, wore, said, and even when she left the house. She also explains how Adrian would abuse her whenever he didn't like something she's done. Until eventually, when he wanted to have a baby with her, she knew she had to find a way out of there soon. So that was when she called her sister and decided to escape the house. Emily tells her that he's gone now, and she's safe with him again. Soon later, Cecilia starts making recovery from her trauma, and can now go outside comfortably. She gets a mail sent to her, which happens to be an invitation from Adrian's attorney, to fulfill Adrian's will and get custody of her share of his wealth. So the next day, Cecilia goes with her sister to meet the attorney, which also happens to be Adrian's brother. He reads out the will to Cecilia, but Emily cuts him off, telling him that was not why they came there. So he proceeds to get her signature. And she'll be receiving a share of $5 million. The first thing Cecile does is open a bank account for James' daughter, which she could use to fund her college fees. To repay them for their generosity of letting her stay with them. Now, everything seems to be going back to normal for Cecile. But weird things starts happening around the house. She hears a creaking noise coming from inside the house, followed by distant footsteps and shudder breaths. She continues to follow the sound, and turns on the lights in the house. The clicking sound continues, and she follows the noise outside. She, however, just assumes that it's just stress due to her paranoia, and shuts the door. She soon goes to bed, and we see her blanket being pulled from her body, followed by lights flickering. She wakes up and sees a mannequin, which gives her a bit of scare. She gets up to get the blanket, but it appears to be stuck. We then see someone's foot appears to be walking on the blanket and getting closer to her. She freaks out and calls out for James. James comes running in, and she tells him what she saw. But James tries to calm her down, telling her that she shouldn't let Adrian haunt her, and she should try to get some sleep before her job interview tomorrow. The next day, Cecile goes for the interview, but during the interview, she notices that someone had taken out all her documents from her bag, which left her confused even more, But the interviewer tells her not to worry about it. Cecile starts to get unstable and dizzy and finally collapses. She goes to the hospital after to get checked, and she gets a call from the hospital when she gets home later, and it is revealed she was drugged with the same pill that she gave Adrian that night. But the pill bottle fell off her bag that night she tried to escape, so it's even more terrifying that the bottle happens to be in the house with her. Cecile goes with James to go meet Adrian's brother. She tells him that she knows Adrian is not dead, and that he has been following her, although he is confused on what she's talking about. She tells him about Adrian's recent invention. Since Adrian is a world leader in the field of optics, he had managed to create the first invisible suit made by man. And he's using it to stalk her. Adrian's brother tells her that Adrian is probably getting into her head, and that he figured out how to torture her even in death, because his brother did the same thing with him, because he is a brilliant mastermind. He shows her photographs of his body and advises her not to give him the pleasure of making her miserable. Cecilia gets back home and cries on the floor for hours. James' daughter comes in and comforts her, telling her maybe that should just have a little girl's night. And Cecile agrees. But as she gets up, we see an invisible force hitting James' daughter to the floor. And Cecile is shocked at this. James' daughter was the one who hit her and screams out for her dad. James comes running in and she tells him what happened. No matter how much Cecile tried to explain to him that it was Adrian, James had had enough already of her craziness, and tells her to get herself together, and takes his daughter outside. Cecilia screams out and tells Adrian to show himself. She takes out a knife and a black powder, and pours it all around the room. She then sits in the corner and waits for him to show himself. She cries while asking Adrian why he wouldn't just leave her be, after taking her whole life from her already. She takes up a phone and dials Adrian's phone number on it. And it starts ringing from the attic and playing a voice message. She takes a ladder and climbs up to the attic. She flashes lights around and then climbs up. She calls the number again, and finds the phone ringing. She picks up the phone, and finds photos of herself sleeping. She also finds a kitchen knife placed inside a bag, and her missing architecture document from her interview. The phone buzzes and she gets a message which says, "Surprise." With trembling breaths, she takes the knife and heads down, slowly placing the flashlight down. She looks down on the ladder from the attic, and throws paint down, which revealed an invisible figure. She follows the paint trails to the living room while holding out the knife. She goes to the kitchen sink, where she finds the washed up paint and turns the faucet off. She slowly gets lifted up by the invisible thing, and thrown against the wall. She battles to get free from it while it continues to attack her, knocking furnitures out. She then gets pulled by her hair and dragged across the room, but she breaks a plate on its head and runs outside. She continues to run into the dark street while calling for a lift. She tells the driver to take her to Adrian's address. And they make their way there by dawn. She tells the driver to wait for her while she goes get something. She goes inside, and makes her way towards Adrian's lab. She finds the invisible invention she saw earlier, and inputs the code to the door, which happens to be their anniversary. She finds out that the invisible suit appears to be a highly advanced camera that Adrian had created. She presses a button which causes the machine to begin transforming and revealing the invisible suit. It appears to be made up of thousands of highly advanced tech cameras. She takes the suit off from the mannequin and heads outside. She hears footsteps approaching and goes to hide in the closet, but Adrian knocks her out. Luckily the dog shows up and starts barking at him, giving her the chance to escape from there. She calls her sister, and tells her to meet her at a restaurant by 8 o'clock. She shows up soon, and Cecile tells her about her discovery at Adrian's house. She tells her that she found something that can prove what she's experiencing. But before she can tell her about it, Adrian picks up a knife and slits her throat, and put the knife in her hands. Everyone in the restaurant gets petrified seeing her with the bloody knife, and Cecile cannot even process what just happened in front of her. And she gets arrested and gets taken to a mental hospital. She struggles and screams, telling them that he is here, but they sedate her and she passes out. And Adrian tells her, "Surprise." Cecile becomes a patient at the mental asylum. And few days later Adrian's brother comes to see her. We find out that he knew all along that his brother was alive, and he had been working with him all this time to torture Cecile. He tells her that Adrian is giving her the option of coming back to live with him, and that she could have her old life back and be cleared as a murderer. But Cecile doesn't agree and tells him she won't. He tells her that he'll come back in 3 days' time to see if she had changed her mind, and we see her taking a pen and hiding it. At night, after the hospital attendant leaves, we see her going to the bathroom and bringing out the pen she took earlier. She breaks the tip off and began to cut herself with it. Just then, Adrian grabbed her hand, and she stabs him with it, revealing the suit. They both wrestle and she continues to stab him, but he knocks her away. A security guard comes in and saw the invisible suit, and before he could do anything, Adrian grabbed his weapon and uses it to kill him. Cecile uses this chance to make a run for it, but gets caught by 2 security guards. Adrian soon catches up with them and killed them both. More security guards come in and he attacks them too, killing them. Cecile makes her way downstairs, shooting at Adrian, and heads outside. She continues to look for him, but Adrian catches up with her, and grabs her by her neck. He tells her that since hurting her cannot teach her a lesson, he's going to hurt someone she loves instead, and he'll be going after James' daughter. But she begs him to leave her alone. Cecile goes after him. She tries to shoot him but he managed to escape, causing a car to crash. Cecile pulls the driver and takes over the car, and starts chasing after Adrian. She calls James and tells him to go to his daughter, that Adrian is going to do something bad to her. We see Adrian going into the house, and James' daughter wakes up and hears footsteps around the house. She grabs a can of pepper spray and sprays it at Adrian's eyes as she screams and runs out. But Adrian catches up with her, knocking her to the floor. James gets home soon and heads inside, calling out for his daughter. He finds her suffocating on the floor and gets hit by Adrian. He beats James up until he is all bloody and goes unconscious. Cecile soon arrives at the house too, and sprays fire extinguisher all over the invisible suit. She then shoots at him, but he continues coming closer to her, until the finally breaks down. Cecile takes the suit off Adrian's face, but it is revealed that the person who has been trying to kill them all this while is not Adrian, but his brother. Cecilia is left in shock and confused. In the next scene, we see police officer going into Adrian's house and searching. They go down to the basement and find Adrian tied up and beaten. James tells her about it, but Cecile still thinks Adrian was the one behind it. James tries to make her see reason, but Cecile tells him that if he faked his own death, he can fake his own kidnapping. She tells him that Adrian planned it all. He set his own brother up. Later that night, she calls Adrian and agreed to come see him. She goes by to his place, and we see Adrian happily waiting to see her. Adrian prepares dinner and they both sit and chat. Adrian gives her some romantic speech about how he's sorry for everything, but Cecilia tells him that if he's going to be part of her life again, they need to start with honesty. So Adrian confessed to it all, that he was the one who did it all and not his brother, and tell her that he's sorry. We also see James in the car, recording the whole thing. Cecile tells him that she'll go clean herself up. Next we see Adrian picking up a knife and slicing his own throat before he starts bleeding. Cecile comes out crying and calls 911. It is all recorded on camera, but we see her expression change later when she's out of the camera and she watches Adrian bleed to death, telling him, "Surprise," revealing that she used the invisible suit to make it look like Adrian killed himself. Cecile comes out of the house and James rushes to her asking if she's okay. She tells him that he killed himself. He sees the invisible suit inside the bag she's carrying. She asks him what did he hear. And James tells her that he killed himself. And the movie ends with Cecile walking out of the building, finally relieved to be free of her psychopath husband. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and we'll see you on our next video.